Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, a show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Cadley, and I'm here with my good friend, Bill. Hi, Bill. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, Cadley. I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm super excited about this week's episode.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about this week's episode. I know you hosted, and this was one that you have been working on for a while, so.
Yeah, so I think if you work here at Monotype, you probably have heard me talk about my obsession with WeTransfer. I love WeTransfer. I think it's just such an awesome brand. It's a certified B Corp. They really put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, in terms of investing in the creative community and in creative work and in telling wonderful stories. You know, they've won an Oscar for a short film. And so this week's guest is Holly Fraser, who's the editor-in-chief of We Present, which is the digital media arm of WeTransfer, and largely the arm that's responsible for a lot of the brilliant storytelling that the brand does. It was just a really wonderful episode, learning more about WeTransfer's mission, about the future of the creative economy, and tips for creators who are looking to tell great stories and looking to build really meaningful careers.
Exciting. Well, I'll let you two get into it. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Bill.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Creative Characters by Monotype. I'm today's host, Bill Connolly, and I'm so excited to be joined by our guest today, Holly Fraser. Holly is the editor-in-chief of We Present, which is the editorial arm of WeTransfer. Certainly one of my favorite brands on the planet right now. And so it's really an honor to have her here, and I'm really looking forward to interviewing her. So welcome to the show, Holly.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me. Looking forward to chatting.
I have to tell our listeners that getting to this point today has been quite a challenge because we had to find a way to get you a microphone. Holly is actually recording live from our London office today, which is really exciting. And then just at the last second before we started, my microphone broke and I had to go get a new microphone. So it does feel like we had to overcome quite a bit to get to this point, but we did it. We're here, and I'm really excited for our conversation.
There's always technical difficulties in there, especially in tech companies. I feel like people don't state that enough, but we have them a lot.
Yeah, it's like the cobbler's children phenomenon, right? Like we can't make our own shoes. So there's a lot I want to get to and I want to talk to you about. As I said, I'm a huge fan of the work that you do, and I think the creative industry is. But I wanted to start by just asking you about your background. What brought you to this point in your career? You started as an editor or writer in a magazine world, right?
Yeah, and that actually wasn't even the first part of the journey. I started by going to art school. So I went to Camberwell Art, where I thought I wanted to be a fashion designer. So I did a foundation degree in art. Very quickly realized that fashion design was not for me. It's a type of a world. So that's all I'll say on that. And journalism had always been my other passion. So I did a journalism degree and switched into the world of editorial. Worked at a number of magazines from the age of sort of 18 up. Also spent a little bit of time working as a short film producer, and then spent a large chunk of my career as the editor of Hunger, which is a biannual culture magazine that was founded by the photographer Rankin, who also founded Dazed and Confused, which was amazing. It was a real learning curve. I was definitely thrown in the deep end, but learned a lot, met a lot of really interesting people. And my time then naturally came to an end. I wanted to sort of do something else and was actually considering just going freelance for a while and thinking about what direction I wanted to go in, and started talking to the previous editor-in-chief of We Present, Rob Alderson, who started the platform. And it turned out that they were looking for a new editor, and I admired what they had done from afar. I thought WeTransfer was a really, really interesting brand. I didn't know that much about its history, aside from the fact that I used it literally every day to send files in the magazine world. And, we got talking. I had a few meetings there, met the team, and accepted the job and moved to up sticks and moved to Amsterdam. And that was about 3.5 years ago. And I have to say it was the first brand, or it is the first brand that I've ever worked at, and was a little bit kind of unsure to start with, because you hear horror stories sometimes about selling your soul and going to work at a brand, and I'd previously been largely in the kind of independent magazine side of things, but I have been very, very pleasantly surprised. It's a really great company to work for, and we get a lot of creative freedom at We Present to work with amazing creators and put some really incredible work out there. So yeah, it's been a good journey so far.
So I want to put a pin in some of your past experience because it strikes me how relevant it then becomes later. And I think that's true of a lot of creative people. You do all sorts of different things. You have no idea how those puzzle pieces are going to fit together, but then they find a way of influencing you later on. So I hear you say you were a short film producer. That obviously comes to pass later too in some of the work that you do here at WeTransfer. But before we get to that, for those not in the know, and you will be in the know by the end of this episode, how would you describe WeTransfer as a company and specifically then WePresent?
Well, I think WeTransfer is, for want of a better way of describing it, it's a creative company. I think it's been, pigeonholed a little bit because everyone knows it as a file sharing company, which obviously is, the key functionality of the company. It's its bread and butter. But it was actually founded by two creatives. One worked in advertising and one was an illustrator who, instead of literally couriering hard drives around Amsterdam, needed a better way of sending their files to each other. And that's how the sort of service and company was born. But it's always been really deeply embedded in the creative industry. From the very beginning, WeTransfer has given away advertising space. So we call them wallpapers, those kind of really cool backgrounds that you see on the site. And they've been given away to, artist friends originally, to creative causes. And that led to the site being a bit more of a curatorial platform for artists. And, we saw that there was a real interest in the type of artworks that were being displayed to our users. And that kind of turned into, okay, well, people are interested in this. Maybe we can take that one step further. And then there was it turned into a company blog called This Works, which basically profiled artists and did kind of one-off projects. People, again, were super interested in it. And in turn, that led to WePresent, which is the WePresent that you sort of see today, which is now a kind of fully fledged. We don't call it the editorial platform of WeTransfer. We call it the digital arts platform because we, at least in the last 3 years, have really pushed ourselves to do more than editorial. So there is the editorial that you see going up there every day, but we also produce short films, we put on exhibitions, and we do a lot more in real life. We have a magazine and a book out and things like that. So I would say as a company, WeTransfer really is one that empowers creativity and really allows creatives to, make their best work and be able to connect with each other on a global level, which I think is it's really important. And it's a very kind of inspiring place to work, I have to say. So many of the people that actually work at WeTransfer are artists, designers, musicians. Like, they have all these side hustles going on that are encouraged at the company as well. So it's a real hotbed for creativity.
Everyone inside of Monotype gets annoyed with me because I say I have an obsession with WeTransfer, and I'm trying to find any way that I can bring our companies closer together and work on cool stuff together, like this podcast. Just because, to me, as an outsider, but somebody who's passionate about creative work and about the creative community, WeTransfer represents the best of what a company who sort of puts their symbolic money where their mouth is, so to speak, around investing in creative work and creative storytelling for the sake of doing so, as opposed to having to have some sort of immediate return on investment to some of these things that that your team does. And it comes across in the way that art is celebrated externally by the company, but not just with artists in residence. It's very clear that the people inside the company are encouraged to explore the artistic sides of themselves too.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. And, we put our symbolic money where our mouth is, with things like WePresent. We also put our actual money where our mouth is. So I don't know if many people realize, but last month we announced WeTransfer's first foundation, which is called the Supporting Act, which annually gives 1% of the company's profit to creators through a number of different grants in order to sort of help emerging creators. And I say emerging, not young, because we believe that you can become a creator and a creative at any age. And it gives grants to people wanting to forge their careers and sort of be able to make a living out of being creative. And it's one of the reasons that so many people want to work at the company. And it's definitely the reason that I've stayed for as long as I have. Is in the 4 years that we've been around, we've worked with more than 1,000 different creatives from more than 100 countries around the world. And that's something that's also really important to WeTransfer. We're a company that's used in something mad like 190 countries around the world, which still kind of blows my mind that, we have readers in the Cook Islands, for example, and all these sort of amazing far-flung places. But it's also making sure that creativity is not just seen through this very Western gaze. And what we really push for as a team and as a company is to support creativity wherever in the world that is, and make sure that people understand that it's not just coming from these more established cities, but actually in all different parts of the world. And for us, it's really celebrating. We Present mission is to really try and be the most representative creative site in the world. So, big statement, but we're pushing towards it at least.
You have to have big goals, right? To make it worth. I mean, I think every company needs to have a rallying cry, not just a mission or a vision, but something bigger than that. So it's good to have, I think of Chris Doe, who's been on our program, and he has a great agency and digital media company called The Future, but their goal is to educate 1 billion people on how they can make a living doing work that they love, creative work. A massive goal, but it filters everything they do. It sounds like for WeTransfer, it's a similar concept. When I think about describing WeTransfer, it's probably reductive, but the easiest way I describe it to folks, I say they're a file sharing company that won an Oscar. Like how crazy. Even that's like the small little sentence of what WeTransfer is. And again, I know it's very reductive, but to me, it symbolizes just how big of a swing your company takes and is willing to take in service of storytelling.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Slow down. You're slow right down. You're deliberately trying to scare me and intimidate me. I know what you're doing, but you're playing mind games. Slow it down.
For those who don't know, the Long Goodbye won an Academy Award, but it's a story that is not a traditional corporate story, and it's more of those areas of the world and people around the world that aren't as featured in the traditional creative airspace.
We're not exercising, we're dancing, we're not doing sport, we're not doing jumping jacks.
So I'd love to hear, how that sort of came to be and what your perspective was on that project specifically.
It makes me laugh because when I was in my interview for the job with my boss, Damien Bradfield, who's our Chief Creativity and Sustainability Officer, I said to him, what would you love to see from someone in this role? And he was like, I want someone to win an Oscar in this role. And I was kind of like, okay, sure. Like, what are your realistic goals? And he was like, no, that's what I want. And I was like, okay, I'll see what I can do. We'll see. And it was never something that we necessarily set out to do because, awards are great, but it's about the work at the end of the day.
The award can't be the goal, right?
Exactly. But for us, in everything we do, it was really about the story and what kind of impact that story could have. So with The Long Goodbye specifically, I had been talking to Riz's team and his manager, Caroline, for sort of 6 months or so. And we were saying, wouldn't it be great to come up with a creative idea and be very collaborative on it? So we've been having these conversations for a long time, which is sort of how we work with creatives anyway. It's always about figuring out what the story is. It leads to a lot of conversation. There's never a specific pitch or brief or anything. And the film, when we saw the treatment that Riz and the director Anil Korea had put together, it was one of those moments where it kind of was a bit like a gut punch. You just know that it's going to be an important story. And it's obviously won the Oscar. A lot of people say, how do you pick stories? How do you know what's going to be a big hit? How do you know what's going to win awards or whatever? And for us, I never have a good enough answer because it's really gut instinct so often. And it was very much the case with this film as well. We collaborated together and commissioned the piece, and it was filmed in 2 days in December 2019 on a sort of fairly low budget. It was the 2 shortest days of the year. So there was only a certain amount of light to get the shots and all that kind of thing. I remember Riz sent us the first cut of the film and was like, it's not finished yet. We're nearly there. And I watched it one evening after a super long day at work. And I was like, I need to give feedback to this. I'll watch it now. And watched it and just sort of sat there awestruck afterwards. It's, for anyone that hasn't seen it, it's 11 minutes long. It's not very long, but it is an incredibly powerful piece of filmmaking that really is quite haunting.
Abu, get everyone together and they're rounding people up, man. It's happening. It's happening now. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
I think a lot of people would maybe watch it and think it was a risk because it's a brave piece of filmmaking. It's a very, very important piece of filmmaking, but it's brutal and it's, on the nose, and it talks specifically about racism in Britain. And obviously that can then resonate to other parts of the world, but this was specifically about the direction that Britain was heading in post-Brexit. And I remember speaking to Riz when it was nominated for the Oscar before we knew it had won. And he was sort of saying when him and Anil, the director, sent the first draft over, they were kind of laughing at themselves and going, they'll never let us put this out. They'll come back and go, yeah, it's lovely, but you're going to need to cut this. You know, it's violent. It's too much. And we didn't because the film is powerful and it needs to be seen in its rawest state, which is obviously how The Long Goodbye, finally came out. And for us, it was never a risk because when we work with filmmaker and artist, someone we admire, you work with them wholeheartedly. It's about the artist's vision. It's about making sure that what they say is front and center and that we respect that vision. We respect their voice and their mission with whatever the piece of work is. So we ended up putting, The Long Goodbye out exactly as intended it to be. It premiered on We Present I remember exactly, it was the 6th of March, 2020, because it was literally 2 weeks before everything shut down and we had a screening in London. And again, after the film was finished, everyone just sort of sat there, motionless and silent, because it's the type of thing that you can't just sort of get up from and go, oh yeah, it was great. Anyway, should we go get a drink at the bar or whatever? People really needed to sit with it for a minute. We knew it was an amazing piece of work. Within a week of it going live on We Present, it was brought up in the House of Commons by a Labour MP as an example of a piece of work that was really having a resonance rather with an audience and was a real example of racism in Britain. And then we were kind of like, wow, okay, we've made something that's had an impact. It's been brought up in government. This is amazing. This is sort of the pinnacle. And from there, it really snowballed. We entered it into a number of film festivals and it kept winning. And then, I don't know if people know, but in order to qualify for the Oscars, you have to win the grand prize at a number of specific film festivals, which The Long Goodbye ended up doing, and then was officially Oscar nominated at the end of last year. And it was a real honor for us as a company to be involved in a piece of work and to be able to facilitate a piece of work that could get to that level, but also was that important and created such a community among the people that saw it. And I think, that for us was more important than the award. It was about creating something that connects with an audience. And this was the prime example of that being able to happen.
In such divided times, we believe that the role of story is to remind us that there is no us and them. There's just us. And this is for everyone who feels like they don't belong, anyone who feels like they're stuck in a no man's land. You're not alone. We'll meet you there. That's where the future is. Peace.
I hear a few things from what you're saying. It's a wonderful story. One of which being that, when you think about partnerships, and this is what I think about a lot here in my role, is you shouldn't go into any partnership with a preconceived idea of what you want to do. The best partnerships are when you pick the right people and then concept and create something together. And if you pick the right people, get out of their way and let them do what they're going to do. And that sounds like that was sort of the start of this piece. And the other piece is around the idea of empathy and creative empathy. And there's a lot of research that shows, especially with film and television, it has this reciprocal empathy that it can generate when people watch something. It's hard to just describe a scenario maybe that's happening to people in Britain or happening more on a global scale. But when you could see these vignettes of what's happening in their lives, even a fictional character, it makes it a lot easier for somebody to put themselves in their shoes. And so that's where film and TV and media in general have an ability to really change the world. And that brings me to sort of the next thing I want to ask you about, which is around the role of business and creative work and creativity in driving society forward and solving societal issues. And I know that WeTransfer is a certified B Corp, which is another thing we haven't talked about yet, but another way that they're putting their money where their mouth is, and with the Supporting Act Fund. But what do you think about that in a broad scale, the role of business and creativity in society?
Quite often in businesses, I think creativity is considered a sort of nice to have, or investing in the arts is a nice thing to do. And it's a little bit of a badge for companies sometimes, isn't it? To go, we've done this and that, and we've supported, these few causes. But it has to be a real pillar of companies to get behind it in order to make sure that the future of creativity is representative and is constantly a part of business in the way that, I don't know, the finance system is, or the studios, or like whatever. I think it's so important that it's considered and it's funded properly, and that I think companies that do give back to creative arts are the ones that are the more progressive. And I think it's also about, when you do give back to the arts and you sort of, a lot of the work that WeTransfer does is about making sure that the grants we give out, the people we feature, the artists that we work with come from a variety of different backgrounds and different genders and different geographies, because again, it's getting away from this idea that creativity is a sort of elitist pursuit. The more that businesses can invest in that so that the next generation of voices that come through in business are diverse, I think the better, because it's not a surprise that art moves society forward. Like a film can have such a resonance that it can change a law. Like art has always been a tool for protest, for example, and art and creativity has a way of cutting through the noise and connecting with audiences in a way that, I don't know, a politician on the news doesn't, for example, because it speaks to so many different people in so many different ways. So the best thing that businesses can do is continue to invest if they want to be part of these vehicles for change, which is becoming more and more important if you're in the UK, if you're in the US, if you're anywhere in the world.
I think I shared with you when we met last that I wrote a book on modern creativity in 2019. And one of my favorite piece of research that I found was that 97% of children are born thinking at a level consistent with creative genius. And by the time we reach adulthood, that number drops to under 2%. And so, I guess the finding being that we are born creative beings. We have this innate ability and desire and yearning to be creative, and that we are taught through society, through education, through business to stop doing that. But if you think about the businesses that succeed in the way that we solve problems as a society, not just in the business realm, but in the political sphere and everywhere else, it's the creative thinkers that are leaned upon. It's who we revere in order to solve problems, especially ones that may not have existed before or that seem daunting or what have you. So anything that we can do to foster that creative muscle at an organizational level and at an individual level, I think is really important.
I completely agree. And I think it's about businesses and companies and creative companies investing the time in that. And one of the things that we trialed out as a company recently, which was really successful, was this idea of summer Fridays. So throughout July and August, everyone in the company, no matter what level you were, got Friday off work. And the idea was to use that time to recharge, to go and, follow your creative pursuit, do your hobbies or sort of follow your passions. And it had a real effect on the morale of people. Like people actually, especially in my team, in the editorial team, people felt really refreshed. They thought, they felt they were being able to come up with ideas better. And I think we've gone through such a massive shift in the last 2-3 years that when there's a period of time where everyone is sort of exhausted or feels like they've got too much on, it's because, you look at someone's calendar and they're in 9 Zoom meetings all day, and that's sort of 9 hours of constantly being on without the time to actually recharge and to be able to think creatively and be able to get inspired. And I agree with your point completely that, it makes sense that once you reach adulthood, you're not on this sort of creative level genius, because creativity is a muscle that you have to nurture. In the same way that, you train your body or you train your brain, you have to train your creativity. And I think that the more companies that recognize that and give their employees the time to actually nurture that side of themselves will be better off for it, because people will be able to, approach business and approach problems in a much more creative way. One of the other things, actually, it's reminded me, I totally forgot, but it's coming up soon in our company. WeTransfer has an annual hackathon, which is, I think it's like 3 days, where again, everyone, is free to not do their regular work or be in their regular meetings, but has the time to form groups with other people in the company that they wouldn't necessarily get to work with. So, for example, people on my editorial team could team up with the engineers, who could team up with the designers, who could team up with the marketing team and come up with new products or new ways of approaching problems or new ways of amplifying our business and what we do. And we then pitch them to the entire company. Our CEO chooses a winner. Those teams are rewarded. And then quite often those ideas will then go into production, become something that becomes part of the business moving forward. And a lot of ideas have come through that way. And I think that's a really great example, like I was saying, of actually giving your employees time to nurture their creative side and then actually see, the fruits of their labor be something that improves the business in the long run. So I'd love that to be something that I see, happening at more companies.
It's something that we've started to do more of at Monotype, having ideathons. And when I work with teams or when I work with students or something, and most of the time they'll say to me, I wish I was more creative. And I always say you are more creative. You're more creative than you think you are. You just need the space and the time to exercise that muscle. Like you said, it's a muscle. And when you get people talking about or thinking about things that they're coming up with, that they're collaborating with, that are new, that excite them, that's what work should be more often. Like I think everyone's better off. Morale's better. Companies move forward faster. There's a reason why design-led companies outperform financially and all of that good stuff. So I think it's really important muscle to foster.
I definitely agree. And I think it's also, one of the missions that we have at WeTransfer, and at least from WePresent as well, is that ideas don't just come from the editorial team and, shouldn't. So we have on the editorial team monthly curation meetings where the team are pushed to sort of look outside of their echo chambers and bring artists or subcultures or themes from, different parts of the world in order to make sure that we're still being as representative as possible. But that's not limited to just the editorial team. We put a call out to the entire company with whatever that challenge is for the month, and we get people sending us in amazing ideas, because also, WeTransfer is a company with about 40 different nationalities there, and being able to pull ideas from different people in different teams that have different lived experience, I think is really important, because, we're all constantly learning. Like, it's a company that is very open about the fact that we don't always get everything right. We're not there yet. We've got plenty to learn, but we're very open to learning, and learning specifically from all of the employees at the company. You might be in the design team, or you might be in the engineering team or the editorial team, but that doesn't mean that you can't come up with an idea that is going to be able to impact someone else's work in the business as well.
We interview a lot of designers here, a lot of type people, a lot of designers, a lot of artists that are more, in the visual arts, right? But you are coming at your particular art form more from the written word. When do you feel creative? Because you have a lot of pressure on you to continue this momentum and to use like you said, you partnered with, was it 1,000 different artists?
1,000 different artists.
Yeah, over 100 countries. There's a lot of pressure there. How do you balance that? And when do you feel creative and like you're empowered to do your best thinking?
Very good question. Practically, when I don't have 10 meetings a day, which I think is probably the same for all of us.
Yeah.
I am the type of person, I really enjoy my own time and space. And actually, when I first took the role at WePresent, I moved to Amsterdam from London for 9 months and came back to London in 2021, but didn't know anyone there apart from obviously my colleagues, and lived by myself. So there was a lot of time on my own, which I really enjoyed, because I would spend it, wandering around museums, going to the cinema, every weekend, and watching sort of obscure art house and independent movies. And I think for me, that's when I do feel the most creative. I have to say, if we're talking specifically about medium, I find film to be the most creatively fulfilling for myself. I'm obsessed with production design and costume design and different eras, and how that is so transportive in a movie, I think is incredible. And I think that the world that a film can create and allow you to immerse yourself in for, 2 or 3 hours, particularly in a cinema setting where there is no one around, you can sort of zone out and watch it completely, is hugely creatively inspiring for me. And I think one of the things that I find very distracting, on the other hand, and I catch myself doing it all the time, and, you'll be trying to have that same experience watching a film or watching something at home, and I find that I'll be flicking through my phone, looking at Instagram, looking at whatever. And I don't think we give ourselves enough time to actually switch off and actually immerse ourselves in something. So, whether that's a film or a book, whatever, I think that switching your mind to just doing one thing and actually concentrating on taking in one story is, for me, when I feel most creatively fulfilled.
I am obsessed with dialogue. I'm a sucker for great dialogue. I think that great dialogue in film, I loved being around it. I lived in Los Angeles for 6 years, and I loved just being around it, seeing the underbelly. There's a lot of bad stuff there too, trying to in the Hollywood world, but I just love the idea of writing and building that story and building dialogue, because I find a really great piece of dialogue in film can help audiences recognize something about themselves that they knew subconsciously but couldn't articulate. That's what I love about a really good character. That's why I think cinema needs to make a comeback, and see how COVID evolves. But like, you're not on your phone as much on the cinema, and that's important.
We actually did a piece on WePresent recently. It's not actually published yet. It'll be out in a few weeks, about snippet culture. We were kind of talking about it as a team, and there's a lot of record labels that now sign people based on the strength of 15 seconds of a song and like how well that performs on TikTok. And you kind of have to go viral on TikTok in order to like get your next album deal, for example. There's a show in the UK, it's called Gogglebox, which is essentially, and it's like a massive success over here. And it's a show.
I'm sure we will have it soon.
Probably, yeah. Everything makes its way over, doesn't it? But it's basically a show where you watch different people watching TV.
On Saturday night, there was a fresh set of dressed-up celebs having a bit of a boogie on ITV.
The masked dancer, not the masked singer.
So you've got to guess who's dancing in the suit.
Yeah. They are covered up completely.
For example, I was talking to my friend the other day and I was like, oh, did you see this new TV show? I can't remember what it was. And she was like, oh, no, I didn't watch it, but I watched it on Gogglebox. So you get this like weird, segmented, fragmented view of a piece of culture. I'm really interested about what that's going to do to our attention span. You know, if it's 15 seconds of a song or a couple of minutes of a movie that you're watching through someone else's eyes, I don't necessarily think it's a great thing. I think we're sort of diving into it as a cultural phenomenon. Like, what does this mean for art? Because things are getting shorter and shorter and able to capture people's attention, but also what does it mean for people's attention? Like, are we going to be able in the future to sit through a 3-hour movie without getting, super distracted and going off and doing something else? So I think we're in a real interesting space right now as well.
Yeah, I hate the idea of Gogglebox. That sounds awful. And also at the same time, Gogglebox US casting directors, if you're looking for people, I fully sign up, and that would be my dream job, is to just watch TV and be filmed doing it and my reactions, because certainly my wife doesn't want to listen to my reactions to TV anymore. So I'm sure the global audience would love it.
It's really interesting because, on the one side, you're like, wow, none of us have the attention spans to watch anything. And on the flip side, Gogglebox is a huge success over here, and why it's been so successful is that it does create this sort of shared experience and an empathy. You can be a Londoner and you're watching someone in a completely different part of the country watching something that you've also watched and having the same reaction. So these people have become almost like national treasures because it's this everyman view of what's happening in the world or what's happening in culture. So it's a really interesting idea. But, on the flip side, I think we're going into a strange state where, we're doing a million things at once and we're watching a million things. And our brains don't have space to concentrate. So we'll see. Brave new world, right?
It's definitely an interesting sociological experiment, but I love the idea of the way the creative world is changing. And first of all, I want to say thank you for being with us. I love hearing about your insights and some of the work that you and your team have done. I have just a couple of more questions for you before I let you off the hot seat here. But when we think about the creative world, what would you say the creative world needs more of, aside from Gogglebox?
Well, I don't know if it needs more of that, but I would say, the creative world always needs more voices and more perspectives. Like, I don't think it can ever have enough. And I think for so long, if we just look at design, for example, as an industry, I don't have the exact stats, but they are pretty heavily weighted towards most people in design being white men. And I think that's probably true for quite a lot of creative industries or industries in general over the last few decades. I do think we're seeing a change now and a sort of real shift, which is very long overdue, but very, very welcome. So I think the creative industry always needs more voices, always needs more opinions, always needs more perspectives. And I think that's so important because of the way everyone lives their lives these days through tech, social media, their phones, their friendship groups, everything, their views and opinions. We all end up in our own kind of echo chambers, which is completely natural. But I think that the more voices and perspectives that we have on creativity, subjects generally, everything helps us to create a more rounded view of how we see the creative industries and also how we see the world. And I think in order to get there needs to be more infrastructure in the non-traditional creative cities and spaces in order to give hugely creative people access to actually get their voices and their work out there.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I would add more gatekeepers that are not homogenous and that represent and reflect the way that society looks at large.
Completely.
I think that's important too. And then what does the creative world need less of?
Oh, that's an interesting one, actually. The inverse of my last answer, I would say.
Yeah.
The creative industry needs less red tape. I think that quite often people are scared to take risks. And I think that the more risks that can be taken, the more interesting work will be able to be produced. And again, I think it leads to more voices being able to come to the fore. I think we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, I guess, making work for, awards and what you think will do well. I think that because of that, people tend to create what's already been created and sort of certain types of copies of work. So I think the more people are allowed to take risks, I think the better. That's a kind of answer. I think if you see what I mean.
I think it's a wonderful answer. And then last question for you. You've scaled the mountaintop. You won the Oscar. That was the big meaty goal that was given to you when you joined. What's the next one? I want to put a stake in the ground here on the Creative Characters podcast. What's the next big giant goal that for we?
Oh, well, do you know what? If you asked my boss that, he'd say a Pulitzer.
Okay.
Never say never. No, I'm joking. I think for us, the next phase is building community is my realistic answer. I think that we present so far has existed mostly in a digital space and in a digital world, which is, we've done some amazing things there. But what we would love to do moving forward is build a global community. And so that includes sort of, we've talked about the idea of a creative council, sort of creative advisory boards, global ambassadors, and really bringing this idea that creativity is for everyone, everyone's voice is welcome, and representative creativity is the future to the fore as much as we can. So there's some of the ideas sort of percolating in our minds at the moment. And all I would say is watch this space.
That's a great way to end it. Holly, Fraser, thank you so much. It's really an honor to have you on the podcast. I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of it, and we're going to include a lot of the work that Ollie discussed in our blog as a follow-up. But really, really thank you for your time, and continue to keep building beautiful, important work over at WeTransfer and WePresent.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a privilege to speak to you guys.
Thanks for listening. If you want to learn more about Holly's work, check out the WePresent site at wepresent.wetransfer.com. Also look for a link to our blog post in the show notes of this episode, and check out monotype.com/podcast to read about all of our prior guests. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify to rate and review this episode. And if you really like us, subscribe to the show and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is a production of Monotype, Angelino Audio, and Marie Tabarez. We'll be back with more episodes soon. Take care, everybody.